Saturday, July 13th of 2024. A days whose events will live on in history and be remembered in infamy, and probably for all the wrong reasons.
Good morning, Trumptopia. A special segment of the almost daily ZenCast. Hosted by the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's talk Trump.
Of all the things to have to talk about, this is one of those things that have literally been on my prayer card that please, dear Lord, do not let it happen. I am, of course, grateful that he is okay, despite being a loud and vocal advocate against him politically. I would never wish any such form of violence on anyone, and it is a tragedy that anyone was injured or unalived, as the kids say these days. It is no small thing, and I am not here to make light of it, but rather to point out some of the absurdities surrounding it that are going on. So let's be very clear. I do not condone, nor celebrate, nor endorse in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I call out as un-American and categorically undemocratic the events of Saturday, July 13th, 2024. For anyone listening in that has not heard the news or in the future who is not clear on the subject matter, quite unfortunately, for many reasons, not the least of which is that it just adds towards the momentum of normalizing this sort of thing as opposed to eradicating it from civilized society. But it is with no joy, with zero glee, despite any accusations being made on social media. It is with no satisfaction of any kind that I must make this statement that this happened, that we live in this universe. This happened yesterday. Someone, and according to reports and public records, a registered Republican, decided to take the law into their own hands and history into their own hands. And for reasons as of yet discovered in any articulated form. In other words, he did not have a handy manifesto laying about that was quickly found. But this individual that I will refer to as TMC, so as to not utter their full name. This individual apparently, according to reports, according to the investigation as things stand, took it upon themselves, despite being a registered Republican, or maybe because of being a registered Republican and refusing to agree ideologically with Trump and his supporters and his attempt to radically change the Republican Party. Now let's pause here. There are many pins on the corkboard, and I just want to close out this opening thought. I am in no way, shape, or form glad that this happened. This is a Saturday, July 13th, will live on in my heart forever as a very dark and difficult day. A day that was in no way, shape, or form surprising, given the obvious trends that I have been pointing out and being mocked and ridiculed for regarding for over for as long as I've been doing this podcast, and then in less formal ways, in much more direct individual communication ways, and in my self-expression on the internet for a lot longer. And that's the thing that I lament. The online discussion, lightning fast, went from the earnest expression of condemnation. Political violence is unacceptable. Let me be very clear and say it again. I have always stood by this. I have always believed this. There are many pins on the corkboard where I've discussed this in some way, shape, or form or another. Violence in general, in my opinion, is pointless. Political violence double so, because we made up political ideology. It's imaginary. None of it is a universal constant or truth. There is no absolute truth in politics. There are only political statements that resemble reality to some degree or another. And I think a lot of people fail to understand this for many reasons. And a lot of people, it is through no fault of their own that they do not understand this. And thus, we get individuals moved passionately by their emotional reaction, the emotional shitstorm that political ideology puts them through, that they feel deeply identified with. And they feel motivated and moved to issue statements that increasingly normalize the public use of, quote, threats of violence. A meme I made long enough ago that it feels really long ago, but not that long ago. And obviously we're in an audio-only format, so it's not like TikTok where I can put it up on the green screen behind me, and even if it were, I'm not prepared. I don't have it at the ready. But there's been dozens of decades worth of intentional, industrial level conditioning that these weapons of mass unaliving are your ultimate tool to solve problems. And as I said before on the show, Pin on the Corkboard, and I'm sure I'll say again, and I'm going to say right here and right now, and I've declared this publicly on social media in the past, I'm sure I'll be motivated to have to say it again. We are living through an era in which we are witnessing the undeniable, measurable proof, the uncalculable and insurmountable mountains of evidence that violence in any form, of whatever tool you use to commit that violence, organized or disorganized, is ultimately meaningless because it does not address any of the root causes of the actual problems that we collectively face, for which we need to, as a species, take meta-collective responsibility, which, a lot of people don't want to even begin to start to contemplate that. But put up a pin on the corkboard, because that's a whole episode unto itself. Dear friends, I appreciate your audience, the act of you returning to listen to my podcast, and I welcome any of you who are new. And this podcast is weird and wacky and rough around the edges, real, raw, and radically unscripted. No one is telling me what to say, and I'm not, to the best of my abilities to use my critical thinking skills, I am not just blindly repeating talking points from any particular source. I have long spoken out against the manipulative political ideological tactics used primarily by one party to promote the sales agenda of the the weapons industry, the recreational sports weapons industry. Okay, and I'm not alone. Plenty of people of public renown and public positions of public service in the past have called it out before. I'm not the first to say that it is quite legitimately a scam that organizations like the NRA and its cohort of collaborators have pulled on the demographic of American citizens that believe that God wants everyone strapped to the teeth and shooting first and thinking later. This is what we get. This is what we get, folks. And it's not new. No, everyone should be shocked at what happened yesterday, but not surprised. We have an average of 1.5 shootings that qualify as mass shootings every single day in America. And the GOP, what used formerly known as the Republican Party, now, as far as I'm concerned, should be, and I'm surprised that my term hasn't caught on over other terms which are less eloquent and awesome sounding, the Trumptopian Party, which I believe is the grammatically correct conjunction. I guess that could also almost work. But conjugation. So I'm not trying to be rude. I'm not trying to ridicule or mock anybody. But people who blindly follow the utterances of Trump, people who idolize him politically and in a pseudo-religious fashion, I think can be technically and correctly and without mocking or ridicule be called Trumptopians. Does it sound a little cute and adorable? Yes. Is that intentional? Perhaps. Is it legit? I think so. Why hasn't it caught on? I have no idea. But here we are. The self-appointed king of the would-be American kingdom of Trumptopia has had an attempt on his life by a registered Republican. The Trumptopian chorus of talking bobbleheads have already tried to sling false accusations at the quote-unquote deep state and at Democrats. And for the record, for anyone wondering, I am a member of neither party. If there were a political party that I belong to, it would be my own proposed transcendental party, which suggests that we are here to transcend ideological constructs, including all politics. But put a pin on the corkboard, as I've discussed that in depth in past episodes. I don't know which, and I'm sure I'll return. It is rough and tumble and a little ragged around the edges, I said. But I'm sure we'll return to talk about it again. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. I want to keep this short. If we're going to participate in the blame game, and I'm not generally one to do so, but they are, right? The Trumptopian demographic spends the majority of its public discourse time making questionable, if not downright absolutely false, accusations at anyone and everyone that dares to criticize or call them out for their own shenanigans. So it's quite telling that the self-described F your feelings community is all kinds of emotionally conflicted about their idol having had an act of gun violence perpetrated against him. Now, the thing I'm deeply concerned about, and that quite bizarrely, and I do not consider myself predictive or psychic in any way, but I am deeply connected to my intuition, and sometimes bizarrely complex ideas come at me like entire movie bundles in a fractal sort of holographic packet. And several days ago, I would say argue about a week and a half ago, and I kind of wanted to do a podcast the Zeppoverse world building side. Pin on the corkboard if you don't know what that is. It's a special mini-series of this podcast. Like this, what you're listening to now, Good Morning Trumptopia, is a special mini-series of the Almost Daily ZenCast. The World Building Project is a special spin-off series in which I am attempting to narrate the crazy, insane ideas trapped in my head that represent a dystopian future history of a world envisioned on what would happen if things went slightly differently in our reality as we know it now. I did not make that episode, though. But here's the idea that I had. I did post about it on Facebook in real time. So you can verify that I posted this before this dark day yesterday. But remember how forever ago the Supreme Court decided that the office of the president immunizes absolutely, which is crazy and bizarre to me, and I've long ago said that it doesn't make any sense, and that except for extreme cases and in obvious cases where they're trying to protect the military-industrial complex, generally speaking, the consensus historically has been that the president should not be a temporary king permanently above the law until the end of his life, of their life. And so the Trump appointed what do they call it? What is it that the Republican Party hates so much? Not advocacy justices that are also, there's a term that they like. But the justices that Trump appointed, which are behaving in exactly the kind of way that the party formerly known as the Republican Party used to foam at the mouth about, radically redefined the office of the presidency, essentially stating that there is presumed nearly absolute immunity. And they try to back out of the accusation that they've created a position of absolute immunity by saying that it is a temporary presumption which can be challenged in court. But, and here's the fun little asterisk that they don't like you saying out loud, you can't use any of the public records about anything they did in office. Like, you can't use transcripts, you can't use testimony of people in office, you can't use their own you can't use evidence. You can challenge the immunity in court, but you have to find evidence that is not protected by the office. If he did it in the office, that's how they literally say in their argument, it isn't absolute immunity, and then back themselves into a clause that reconstitutes it as a kind of absolute immunity. Okay? So in the immediate days after that, it dawned on many of us, I was not the first, although I think I was ahead of the mainstream media. I think I even posted it before Biden made his speech, that essentially the Trumptopian movement has just made, by bizarre quirk of timing, which they could have chosen better, a temporary king, apparently for life, and that he could now do any of the things Trump wants to do, and or has been accusing him of doing without presenting any evidence of doing, and get away with it, right? And I was deeply thinking about that and sort of ruminating some of the posts I'd made about that, because I just went on a rant, on a tear about, like, I saw other people doing, there was definitely like a buzz about things that the now temporary King Biden could do, that he very quickly said, disavowed, he would never do such things. He would never violate this new privilege that Trump has accidentally granted him during the rest of his period. And he's not even in the lame duck yet, right? Like, it's hilarious, the timing, the way it's worked out. And makes one wonder. Plenty of people out there suggested that perhaps that was a choice, and that they want Biden to do something crazy and fun before he leaves office. Hashtag 2 wings, 1 bird. But I've been on the corkboard about that. And if you don't know what the pins on the corkboard are, it's a little mental analogy for interconnected ideas, just like the meme from the show with the guy and the corkboard and all the strings and the waving his arms around. Except it's stuff that we've talked about on the show and that keeps reoccurring as a theme. So it's sort of like an Easter egg hunt. If you've never heard of this, I now invite you to take a deep, deep dive into the many dimensions of this podcast and collect all the pins on the corkboard so you can start applying your own critical thinking to the broader pictures that emerge. But I digress. So it occurred to me in that moment, prior to yesterday's turn of events, that in all likelihood, in this reality that we exist in, King Biden would not issue the theorized SEAL Team 6 action that Trump's own lawyers and appointed judges suggested would be protected by this absolute immunity that they just declared. And it dawned on me that Trump, being the wily bullshitter, like the kind of person who just does stuff and claims things and makes stuff up, it would not be beyond Ken. It would not be beyond the pale. It would not be beyond the realm of probability or possibility or plausibility. And this just hit me as an idea, and I wanted to write it as a short story, and then I haven't touched it yet. And this will be the first time I'm sharing it on the podcast. So consider this a little insertion of me taking an idea that was triggered by real-life events and sharing a fictional idea, right? As part of a crossover with the Zeppoverse world-building project. It occurred to me, wouldn't it be a bizarre bit of future history if Trump, realizing that Biden wasn't going to issue a, quote, SEAL Team 6 action against him, decided to arrange for a false flag, fake, like something out of a movie? I mean, he sold cheap fake wine and a bogus university full of nonsense content. Faking his own death like a movie character is not beyond the realm of possibility. And it thought me like, why would he do that? Like, it just came to me like he's gonna fake it. I'm like, why? I'm like, oh, because then he can fake. And I went to the extremes. Like, what's the craziest thing? Like, I'm analyzing the thought, because the thought came to me without the analysis. It just came to me. He could, in theory, fake an event in which it appears that he's been unalived, and then disappear for 3 days, and then reemerge completely well, and make some kind of unbelievable claim of being the Christ. And it just, like, talk about a bizarre potential worst case scenario. So, okay, I posted that on Facebook, and I thought about making an audio recording, and I didn't. And the idea never developed any further than that. It was a little bit more well thought out and more specific than I just blundered through it. But I imagined a world in which he pulls this kind of maneuver, and then his political party becomes a religion, and he becomes the next presumed Messiah. And I'm like, that fits perfectly. I'm making that the backstory to the Trumptopian empire as I've already begun to sort of construct it in my literary fictional project known as the Zeppoverse. Now, fast forward to yesterday. I woke up late, having been experimenting with a nocturnal schedule. But I had been weirdly waking up early. So I thought up to date to the news, and not much had happened besides the usual, and I was just like, I don't know what to talk about. Then I get up late and I don't check the news, and I stream some gaming content for a bit, and then I go to take a break, and I was like, what should I eat? And I turn on the news, and I'm hit with the endless, it's like breaking news special events till dawn, literally, on all channels. But the very, 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 very first time I saw the presumably uncut, it looks uncut. It rolls from the moments before when he's addressing the crowd, and then he turns to point at the signage, all the way through to when he gets tucked into the armored limo and driven away. And, okay, this moment in history will be talked about, debated, analyzed, and dissected for the rest of our lives. And there will be waves of nostalgic revisitation every decade. This will be bigger than Elvis and JFK and that other Kennedy and the moon landing combined. Okay? This will be as enduring. I fear very strongly, and not fear like I'm afraid, but I am concerned intellectually that this will eventually outlive the flat earth, globe earth debate as a thing that people will endlessly discuss and debate and argue about. Because the possibility, the realm of potential conspiracy theory is boundless. I'm amazed I haven't seen as of yet they've replaced him with a drone, a clone, a robot, a lizard person in a skin bag. I haven't seen that yet. But within the 24-hour cycle, like before I crashed out to bed, there was, the critical event horizon of memes coming across passively without me needing to search them out, crossing my stream, which means they're everywhere, right? I like to think that on Facebook I have a really interesting cross-sampling of national and international Facebook associates, as I prefer to call them, because I'm not friends with everybody, but we are all on Facebook together and have decided to link so that we see each other's content. I did not time it. I did not write down the exact moment when I saw the first meme. And actually, here's the irony. I almost forgot to bring this up. The weird, oh my God, this will be part of my, if I don't forget, part of my, where was I when this happened? Remember how I said I woke up late and I went almost directly to live streaming some gaming content? I played some Skull and Bones. Come support my gaming content if you're into that sort of thing. If you're not, you can skip all the gaming content and go straight to the podcast and the book series, please. Solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. Okay, so right before firing up the live stream, I on my phone, I opened up Facebook, but it was set to, I had previously closed it on the Gaming Mr. Zeppo page, so it opened up the Gaming Mr. Zeppo newsfeed. And the very first thing I saw was an unrecognized image of Trump, which is now part of the iconic collection from yesterday's event. I did not realize. It was in a Call of Duty group, and it was a Call of Duty meme. And I don't have it in front of me because I dismissed it. I didn't screen grab it or save it. But I think it said something. It was a picture of the early moments of when they first lifted him up. Not the one with the flag waving full, perfect, how did they get that shot moment? That looks like they did it in a studio. But from a little bit earlier, when he first gets up, when he's muttering about his shoes, that's one of the things that hit me right away the first time I saw the full uncut video. But I'm remembering now that earlier in the day, must have already happened, obviously. The news was already zinging around the world. I was completely unaware. I'd just woken up. I walked to the store. No one said anything. I got my coffee. I sat down. I looked at Facebook. I was on Gaming Mr. Zeppo page, on that news feed for that page, because that was the active profile. And I saw a meme, right? And I didn't notice any blood, but I realized in retrospect it had to have been there. But it was, he's surrounded by Secret Service men, and the meme read something to the effect of, when your crew picks up your dog tag. That feeling you get when your crew picks up your dog tag. And I was like, what is this image from? Now, I would never claim to be a Trump visual archive expert, but I have watched my fair bit of his live events and of his speeches. And, I'm familiar with the common images that get circulated because they're from Getty or whatever, and the news agencies use them. All right? I'm not a blind faith news believer. And I'm not a blind faith conspiracy content believer. I'm someone who tries to, distill and distillate from all of the potential sources that I might have at my disposal without ever calling that research, because I'm not able to talk to eyewitnesses. I'm not able to review original documents firsthand. That's research. Pin on the corkboard. I could make a whole episode about that and just get up on my soapbox and ramble about people who claim to do their own research when all they've really done is received, read, and reposted content delivered to them based on keywords they don't realize that they're using because of other content that they've received through the same corporate algorithms. But I digress. There's that episode in a nutshell. I recognize that corporate algorithms are curating the content, right? And I try to go beyond them and to distillate the best of my ability what may or may not have really happened. Now, this was all caught on video live and by multiple sources, not just the film crews that were there broadcasting it, but the people on the, everyone has a cell phone and every cell phone has a 4K camera on it. Now, one thing I hope is that someone, was it ProPublica, who made that time synchronized, overlapping archive of all the cell phone footage that was authenticated as being from someone that was actually there on January 6th. I hope somebody like them pulls together the same transparency-driven kind of searchable archive of the collective video from this event. And it's because it's amazing that we're now barely 48 hours out, right? Not even. We're at the 36 zone. 36 hours. This was just yesterday. So maybe not, it's still, we're somewhere, I don't know the hours, but I'm laughing at myself. I'm also, every number that I said, I saw a movie cover because those numbers are on movie covers. And I'm laughing because I didn't realize I don't know all of those movie titles, but I digress. That's meaningless. The amount of conspiracy theory content that will come out of both the quote left and the quote right is going to be overwhelming, I strongly suspect. And there's already people either in jest, as in making fun of and ridiculing. And this is where I was like, I want to be serious, but I am going to call out the shenanigans. Here's where there's a point of order on the shenanigans. Since the rise of Trump as a political ideologue, someone spewing political statements that people ingest and identify with, the rise of hate speech in general has shot through the roof. The rise in the issuing of death threats gone through the roof. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a cough coming on. The rise of actual gun violence has escalated notably. And throughout, the Trumpopian contingent has consistently decided to deride, mock, and ridicule anyone expressing empathy and sympathy to the victims of these instances of escalating rhetorical, ideological, and politically motivated violence. And now they're lecturing everybody about the seriousness that is required in the moment. I'm sorry, but you get a giggle in the face. Now, I'm not happy that this happened. I denounce it. I point out the fact that we are here for reasons that some of us, myself included, have been discussing in a very serious way for a very long time. And that some of you getting all uppity and in our faces about how important it is to remain composed and to not mock and ridicule anybody in this moment have spent the last 10 years mocking and ridiculing anybody speaking out against gun violence. That just needs to be called out. Now, let me just say right here, before we transition into... I said I was going to keep this short, and it's not as short as I had hoped. It's already twice as long as I originally thought maybe we'd be able to achieve. I'm going to stop rambling. I, for one, am quite grateful. Gratitude, 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 hallelujah, amen, that we do not live in the branches of potential universes that are spinning out of, in their direction, in their alternate direction, of universes where something worse happened yesterday. Where more people were injured and hurt and unalived, including potentially dear old Donnie himself. I'm really glad that that is not the case. Never have I ever spoken violently against anyone on that side of the political, ideological, wedge issue driven system of echo chambers. All I've been doing is pointing out to everybody on all sides is that the system of echo chambers is what's ramping up all of the chaos, and that if we just transcend the ideological constructs involved, we can dismantle the mechanisms that have brought us here to this point in our turbulent chapter of history. Dear friends, our calling is not to duke it out with one another over made-up political ideologies. Our calling here in this surreal place we call reality is not to prove which ideology, religious or political, is the most self-righteous and true, because we made them all up. We are here to learn the lesson that none of these tools heal. None of these tools facilitate growth. So we must abdicate, abandon, and transcend them. Call me crazy, but if we achieved intellectual, emotional, psychological, and spiritual transcendence of ideological constructs and evolved to a place where we could understand each other's needs and the ways in which we can operate our society from a completely different perspective so that we no longer rely on these divisive, treadmill, like wedge issue driven echo chamber systems as means by which to organize all of our civil activities and move on to more efficient, more humane, more compassionate, more genteel, more peaceful-oriented systems, because they're within our capacity to design and to invent. Instead of beating ourselves and each other about the head with these tools of self-destruction that we've invented, we could be healing ourselves and each other and the entire human species. Instead of arguing about which mental constructs are the evil ones, we could be transcending all mental constructs and actually solving the problems that we created from a perspective that is not caught up in ego-driven concepts such as power and profit and greed and hubris. Call me crazy. You wouldn't be the first, you wouldn't be the last, and you wouldn't be the best at doing so. But I think that the fact that we have gotten to this place is a symbol of that calling. We will not solve any of these problems with the tools we use to create them. There's a meme going around which I lament the fact that I kind of have to agree with, because it's what we're voting for that's the issue, right? The policies and the politicians who deliver those policies. What are they? Well, all the imaginary, crazy, unsubstantiated accusations aside, they are all human beings that are flawed and corruptible. And if we come to the comprehension that all of us, any of us, are equally fragile, then we can solve this in ways that would actually make sense. There's a meme going around, you will not vote your way out of this. I distracted myself from quoting it. If I remember correctly, forgive me if I'm misquoting it, but I think that there is such a meme. I don't know that I 100% agree. I think we need to heal the species before any system of self-navigation of the civilizations that we create will be functional in a way that is not riddled with corruption and psychosis, right? It's us. It's our toxic fragility. It's our ego addiction. It's our spiritual trauma. It's our species-wide neglected need for healing that I would posit to anyone that has not yet caught on and hasn't collected the pins on the corkboard enough sufficiently to comprehend. Let me just put a fine point on it. That is the root cause. The root cause is not some imaginary villain from some shepherd's oral tradition. No offense. We do not need organized religion and its imagined demonology in order to comprehend what's going on and solve it. We probably don't even need my own hippy-dippy new age secular spirituality of consciousness. But at least it makes sense and seems to actually facilitate the objectives at hand. The inner work, the trauma work, the quote-unquote shadow work, turning inward as an individual and as a community, sharing in that process instead of turning outwards, vilifying others, slinging false accusations and imagined absurdities, and then getting so worked up with the fear and the outrage that we collectively convulse into fits of violence. If we went inward and did the spiritual work suggested by, spiritual leaders that some of the people committing the violence claim to follow, because if we dig deep into the documentary, source material, you'll find that Jesus didn't say anything about the LGBTQ community, but he did talk about, spiritual practices that are healing, but that's a pin on the corkboard. Lots of previous moments where we've discussed them on the podcast, and I encourage you to go find them, please. And then, of course, stay tuned, as we will most certainly come back full circle there. I'm not here to engage in the. I hate, there's that catch-22 phrase of I didn't want to have to say I told you so. But I, for one, have been consistent in pointing out that one of our unacknowledged issues or under-recognized issues is that we profiteer on everything. And there is a distinct technical, significantly important meaning difference between making a profit and profiteering. But as a system of systems, as a system of systems that we created, collectively speaking, as a species, as it rolls along, it creates opportunities for events like what happened yesterday, so that sales of these machines explicitly designed for efficient and dare we almost call it commercial unaliving, sell more prodigiously. And it's going to happen. I assure you, it might take a while. In a year or two, we'll be seeing reports that in the days, weeks, and months after yesterday's event, sales of war paraphernalia are going to skyrocket. And so will the claims that God individually and personally protected his chosen politician. Now, pins on the corkboard. I've already, long before this event yesterday, I've spoken on many occasions about the absurdity of this idea that which is the divine energy we use the word God to identify when we understand it clearly, and that we hyper-personify into a comic book superhero, and that's an imaginary version of the thing that we call God. That either way, it makes zero sense for either of them to have a vested political party interest. It makes absolutely zero sense. It doesn't make sense within the confines of the already convoluted logic of traditional Christian dogma. And it doesn't make sense in the broader understanding of the realities of the living spiritual consciousness that permeates reality. And it makes even less sense from that perspective. So, no matter what happens, whether he, God forbid, whether he wins the election, knock on wood, I really, really genuinely continue to pray that he does not, for all the technical and tactical reasons that I would prefer it be anybody else, even Joe Biden, with whom I have plenty of disagreement with, most particularly about the positions that we take on how like just perpetuating war. Let's perpetuate war instead of demanding that parties find the humanity in them to achieve a global ceasefire. But I digress. That's a whole nother subject matter that deserves its own special miniseries. The big embarrassing elephant in the room is the things that I'm certain of. And there are a lot of things that I am uncertain of, including how on earth it is that the Secret Service managed to not include this building, which tactically is an obvious failure point, an obvious point of interest, an obvious point of danger in the situation logistically. Now, I'm not an expert. I'm by no means. But based on what I have come to understand about the way tacticians think, that would be like the number one point of concern beyond the immediate perimeter of the venue itself, because it is line of sight and within tactical range. End of story. There should have been armed security staff on that roof. And, that's a whole nother thing. How and why did it fail? Plenty of conspiracy theory content is already being spun around that particular weak point. There's also all kinds of, I think given the callous way in which many loud Trumptopian voices and meme makers have behaved during the course of this escalating, mass shooting epidemic in America, there's a lot of people that would normally be genuinely empathetic and mournful of this attempted, should we call it a regicide? Attempted regicide? And it's funny, Trump supporters deny that Trump wants to declare himself temporary king of America and will then turn around and call him king. Ultimately, what I'm humorously less than thrilled about, like, it makes me giggle, but in a gross, I'm going to have to live with this for the rest of my life. Just like there are now currently an exponential number there's an exponentially growing number of flat Earth versus globe Earth public debate groups. There will be, was it real or was it fake debates ongoing on social media for the rest of my time here on this planet. Unless humanity gets its act together right quick. I don't know the answer to that question. There are many reasons I see, and I felt this in real time. I mean, I wasn't watching the speech in real time, but in real time of me watching the uncut tape for the first time, as it is claimed to be, I was like, wow, there's so many questions, right? Some of which are easily explained, I'm sure. But okay, so the security failure about that roof is one of the biggest. Why was he not wearing his shoes when he got back up, or rather when they lifted him back up? He didn't get back up on his own. He didn't fall. He clearly ducks down awkwardly under his own power after, feeling the sting of whatever. And I've heard claims that it wasn't, that there's no way that his ears was clipped by the caliber of round that was probably used. I don't know for a fact that that's been reported out by a verifiable source with documentation, right? But there's definitely a meme of someone at a gun range going, I don't believe that his ear was clipped by this, and holding rounds against, in their hands. And they're huge. Others have made the claim that what cut or damaged his ear was broken glass from a teleprompter. And others are making a claim that it's completely artificial. I've seen, the quote crisis actor memes are already cropping up, and were so very, very quickly. And all of this doesn't. What's amazing is none of it clarifies what happened, other than what seemed, that there's now clearly going to be a growing division between people on one camp that believe it to be real. And there'll be subdivisions in that camp, people who take it as tragic, but otherwise sort of like, whatever, you guys wanted this many guns everywhere kind of thing. And others that will insist that it is proof of his divine ordinance, that he is the chosen one, which is crazy and insulting to anyone else who has lost a family member to any form of violence, if you really think about it. If God is capable of preventing violence at any given chosen time, why does he not prevent all violence? If he's all-powerful and all-knowing and all omnipresent and omnipotent, why does he only protect people like Donald Trump and not, the innocent children suffering in every war zone that has ever existed in history? It doesn't make sense to me. But that's going to go on for decades. For decades. People who were not alive in this moment will inherit the argument, folks. And the truth is, the majority of those people will never actually conclusively know. The best we will get is whatever report comes out by whatever group of investigative bodies. And we can only hope that there's actual, CSI level forensic evidence included. And even that will be denounced as made up, right? There will forever be this tug of war that fundamentally divides at least, a certain percentage of Americans and the world, presumably, between whether or not. And then the subdivisions are absurd. If this was a false flag, who orchestrated it? And why? Why would his opposition orchestrate a false flag in which he doesn't, in which he survives? Why would they do that? Now, the reasons why he himself would orchestrate such a thing are obvious, and I don't even think I should get into it. But he's already milking it from what I understand, and his voters who have already, prior to yesterday's events, given him billions of dollars in donations, are now ponying up more. I don't pretend to know. All I know is I am already preemptively exhausted by the argumentation that I'm sure will go on for generations. And what I'm much more interested, first of all, if it was real, I'm really glad that it did not succeed. And I want to be very, very clear. I would never wish that on anyone. I would never condone or celebrate or applaud it. Violence does not solve anything, even in the face of those willing to perpetuate the worst atrocities. The bottom line, based on everything I've questioned, everything I've thought about with the best of my abilities to apply critical thinking and to investigate. I will never in my life call any of my activities research, but my ability to look into and question what's going on in the world to the limited degree that I can. After some 40 years of it being a concern and a theme in my life, questioning and contemplating this, I am convinced that it is a manipulative act of marketing to perpetuate the notion in any context that violence and or war solves the real problems that plague our society. They never have. If they did, why are we here in this train wreck of a historical moment? And that the calling is to come to that understanding individually and collectively, and to make the effort to express these concepts at the public discourse level for others to rally around and to do the personal work required. We must all carry the burden of speaking out against the perpetual momentum towards trying to quote-unquote solve things using the toxic psychology of peace through strength. That's manipulative neurolinguistic code for war profiteering, in my humble opinion. And that if the species intends to survive and avoid its own self-annihilation, we need to transcend all of these ideological constructs that keep people attached to fear-based and hate-based emotionality that creates the permission structure for taking up arms against one another. If we don't solve that spiritual riddle through healing, we will just carry forward the absurdity of trying to solve problems of our own creation through toxic means, which will never get us anywhere but closer and closer to our own extinction. And with that, friends, I bid you to not dwell on the horrors of it all, but to take on the calling to turn inwards and reconnect with your own divine light. That is where the solutions will emerge from. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Please, as always, remember, I'm not here to get anyone to blind faith believe what I'm saying, but rather to deeply contemplate and meditate on them for themselves. Join me traveling backwards and forwards through time in an exploration of recent world events that are shaping our future, in a discussion of how we can respond to them in order to transcend the shit show, transcend the train wreck, transcend the dumpster fire, and manifest the collective and individual healing required to once and for all actually solve the problems that we ourselves created. I'll stop repeating myself now. Peace be with you, friends. Go be good human beings to each other, especially now. Especially now. I've said this before, and I'm going to have to say it again, put a pin on the corkboard. We'll have to have a deeper discussion about it. But if there is ever a time for any and everyone who does not practice Christianity to attempt to be more Christ-like in a secular way, I don't mean go join a church, but rather be as compassionate and as forgiving and as loving and as healing and as empathetic and as humane and as caregiving as those who claim to follow in the footsteps of Christ often fail to be. If that doesn't sit well with you, then we can replace the spiritual teacher. It is our time to be as Buddha-like as we, this human species, have failed to be. You get the picture. In the tug of war, heaven and hell are here and now, friends. They are what we make of this world. And in the tug of war between our better angels and our own self-destructive demons, it is up to us to recognize that they are our own yin and yang, and that we are not here to engage in a war on either side of this imagined divide, but to reintegrate that which has been rendered asunder through trauma. May we all be healed. May we all heal ourselves and each other. Thank you for listening. This has been a special episode of Good Morning Trumptopia, a presentation of the Almost Daily ZenCast.
And that is the latest madness from behind the orange wall. Thank you for listening to GMT, a special segment of the Almost Daily ZenCast. Stay woke, Trumptopia. Stay woke.
I always forget that I say that at the end of that pre-recorded thing, and then I laugh at myself for having made that. Oh, satire. Sometimes, I don't even know. Hang in there, folks. It can get better. We just have to step up.